Once again, my name's Rachel, and I'm going to be your instructor for today's Advanced Masking in ProShow Producer online class. And this course is going to take you through 3 examples of how you can use masking inside ProShow Producer. And while masking is a powerful feature in itself, the reason why this is an advanced course is that we're going to start to combine masking with other effects. So we're going to use keyframing, we're going to use chroma key transparency, and we're going to use vignettes, maybe even some other sort of editing effects. So it's really the combination of these that makes this an advanced class. In the Intro to Masking class, you mostly focused on how to use masking and what can result from using masking. And here in this class, we're going to kind of dive in deeper and actually create real-world examples. So the first example that we're going to be creating today uses a feature called chroma key. And chroma key transparency basically allows you to pick a specific color range and make that color range in your image or video transparent. So have any of you ever worked with chroma key before in any sort of like imaging editing program? If you have, click the hand icon. Okay. Looks like 2 of you have, Alexandra and Richard and Delmar. Awesome. So you're familiar kind of with the concept of chroma key, and it works very much the same way here inside ProShow. And it's a nice feature if you want to kind of single out a color to kind of go away and be transparent. So just to kind of show you how chroma key works, we'll go ahead and work with this example that I have selected here, the nature_01 image. And I'm just going to drag and drop that into slide number 1. So you're probably familiar with chroma key. It's kind of that green screen effect, how they create lots of the special effects in movies. They shoot the actors in front of a green screen, and then they can edit that green out, and they're able to replace the green with whatever sort of imaginary background that they want. It's also the same technology. They used to do a green screen or a blue screen behind the weatherman, and you just replace that blue or green with the map of whatever part of the country or countries you're looking at. So it's a technology that's been around for a while. What I want to do real quick is just adjust my show settings. It looks like somehow it got set on 4:3, and I'd much rather work in a 16:9 setting. So I'm just going to adjust that real quick. Alright, so let's take a look at chroma key. Let's double click on our slide to open up our slide options. We're going to find our chroma key options in the layers category underneath the editing tab. So for this image, Nature01, what I want to do is remove all of the blue from this image. Now we want to be careful because, as you know, green has a little bit of blue in it. That's how we make the green, the combination of blue and yellow. Everybody knows that. So we want to make sure we only remove the blue and not the green. And we're going to do that using chroma key transparency. So take a look in the lower left-hand corner of your slide options window. You'll see it says chroma key transparency. Let's enable that option. Just turn that on. By default, nothing really happens. The default key color is black, and that's not really what we want to use. So what we're going to do is click the Set button. Now you could kind of try and find the right color blue by using the color wheel, but I think the best way for you to find the precise blue color you want to use is to click on the eyedropper tool. Select that eyedropper, and then take your eyedropper and hover it over the blue background, anywhere over the blue background. Now when I do this, by default you're going to see some of the background start to be eaten away. We've chosen a good color, a color that's fairly prevalent in the image. Something to note when you're working with chroma key is that unless you choose the precise color that I choose, which when we're using the eyedropper is a little difficult, so unless you happen to choose, if you look down at the bottom, you chose these RGB settings, 46, 101, and 163, your settings for chroma key are going to be slightly different than mine. So just know that chroma key is kind of a feature that you need to play around with a little bit. It's not going to work the exact same way for every single image. It takes a little bit of finessing. So once we've selected our key color, you can see that some of the blue has already been removed. And what we want to do is watch on the lower right hand side the before and after editing panes. Especially when we watch the after editing. What we want to end up seeing in the after editing is everywhere where it's blue, we want to see that white and gray checker. And that's going to let us know that it's transparent. So since our background is black, it's a little misleading to only look at the preview window. So you really want to take a look at the after editing pane in the lower right hand corner. So now we need to make some adjustments down below the key color selection. We can work with hue, intensity, and color suppression. So first thing we want to work with is our hue threshold. And this is going to determine what range of colors become transparent. And it's based on the color that we pick as our key color. So we start to incorporate other ranges of blue when we increase the hue threshold. We're taking in other hues into account. So I would start out just by moving it slowly. Just taking it to 1%, you can see it already removes quite a bit of the background. And we'll just continue to kind of ease it over. We're at about 7%. Haven't seen much of a change in a while. I'm going to try and make a large adjustment and see what happens. Okay, you notice when we get to about 30-something%, we start to eat into our leaves. And we don't want to do that. So let's take it back to about 14%. Maybe we could take it back to 12. All right, now the next setting is hue drop-off. So it's going to determine how much of the edge of your image is incorporated into the hue threshold. And this is going to be kind of the edge of whatever's kind of been eaten away already. So we'll start to increase that, see if it makes much of a difference. We're at 9%. I haven't seen too much of a difference. If we increase it all the way up to 100%, nothing really happens. So let's just take it back down to about 10. All right, next, we're working with intensity threshold. Now this is going to control what isn't transparent, and it's going to force very bright areas and very dark areas to become opaque. So we're going to take this intensity threshold, look what happens, 1%, and look at my ending position, my after editing. It's already starting to look better. 2%, it looks much better. So this is going to be a setting that helps us out quite a bit. We want to get rid of all this black around the outside too. So we'll keep increasing. Doesn't look like we're going to have to increase too much. We've still got some black in the corners at 11%, so we'll keep going a little bit more. Alright, I think 25 is good. Let's see what happens if we keep going a little bit further. It might start eating into our leaves. It looks like at about 30 it starts eating to the leaves. So let's just reduce it back down to about 30 or 27. Excuse me. Next we'll do intensity drop-off. And just like hue drop-off, this is going to determine how much of the edge of our image is incorporated into the intensity threshold. So we'll ease this up just a little bit. 11% looks pretty good. Doesn't seem to be doing much more as I continue to increase it, so we'll just take it down a little bit. Our last setting is color suppression, and this is going to remove our key color that we chose up here from the edge of our image. Now color suppression can help quite a bit as well. It looks like we have just a little bit of blue left around our leaves. Not too much. I think it looks pretty good. There's a little bit of blue left in the upper left-hand corner. So we can take it over to the right just a little bit, and it should help sharpen things up a bit. You want to be careful when you're working with color suppression. If I take it over to the right quite a bit, take a look, it changes the color of my leaves. So we'll take that back just to about 18%. That looks like the correct place before it starts to eat into my green leaves. Alright, so now it kind of just looks like we've got an image on top of a black backdrop. We can zoom in a little bit, make the leaves take up a little bit more of the lower left-hand corner of the preview window. So now to see kind of the real effect of what we've done here, we can take another image. maybe this sunflower image, and we can drag and drop it into our slide. Now we want to open up our slide options and make sure that this sunflower image is the bottom layer, and take it and maybe zoom in a little bit. And now take a look at what we've done. We've successfully blended these two images together. We've got these green leaves that are just kind of mysteriously floating on top of our sunflower. So we were able to isolate the leaves to create this sort of effect by removing all of the blue from the background. All right? So we're going to use this concept of chroma key in conjunction with an alpha mask to create our next example. So it's actually our first example. So this was just kind of a test of how chroma key works. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use chroma key to remove all of the background from this image of a bride. And we're going to place this image in the foreground. The bride is going to be in the foreground. And behind her there's going to be a letterbox shape with a background moving. So what we're going to do is start out by creating that background. And we're going to use this image of Hawaii, Waikiki area. And we're going to drag and drop that into slide number 1. Let's make this slide time a little bit longer. And I'm going to go ahead and just change my transition effect to 0. Okay, so let's set up our alpha mask, our letterbox shape. So we're going to double click to open up our slide options. I'm going to start out in the layers category in the layer settings. On the left, go ahead and change the scaling for this layer to fill frame. That way we don't see any of the background showing through on the right or left. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a mask. And it's going to be this mask that's going to allow us to create that letterbox shape. So it's going to allow us to only see part of this landscape beach image. And we're going to even be able to zoom in on the landscape beach image. But even when we're zooming in, our letterbox shape is going to stay intact. It's not going to get any larger. And we can achieve this by using an alpha mask. So in your layers list, click the plus button and choose to add a masking layer. We're going to go ahead and make it a solid color layer. If any of you took the Introduction to Masking course, you'll remember that when we work with masking layers, we tend to work, especially alpha masks, we tend to make them red. And the reason is going to become much more apparent as we go and work in the third example today, when we're going to be working with several masking layers in one slide. So for this layer, go ahead and click OK. Now on the left side, underneath masking layer, you want to make sure that the mask type is alpha transparency. Now because the mask layer is taking up the entire slide, we haven't created that letterbox shape. We're able to see our entire landscape beach image. So we need to create that that letterbox shape. So go into your effects category. We're going to be working in the motion effects tab. Make sure layer number 1 is selected. And in the starting position, in between your zoom X and Y, we're going to click on the chain link icon that locks in the aspect ratio. So we're going to unhook that. And actually, before we even complete this, what we want to do is do a little bit of keyframing because we don't want this background image to show up through the whole slide. We want it to kind of make an appearance. So what I'm going to do is click the plus button to add a new keyframe really quick. And for, we'll leave keyframe 2 at 2.5 seconds. So just make sure that keyframe 2 is about halfway in between keyframe 1 and 3. Make sure you're working in between keyframes 1 and 2. Go ahead and break that chain link icon in keyframe 1, and we're going to change both our zoom X and our zoom Y value to 0%. We want it to pretty much not show up on the screen. Now for keyframe 2, go ahead and make sure that the constraints in between your two layers are broken. You may need to change zoom X and zoom Y. You may need to toggle those lights to manual mode. You may want them to be blue. And in the keyframe 2 position, zoom X is going to stay 100%, but zoom Y, which is our vertical axis, we're going to change that to 50%. And so that's going to give us our letterbox shape. You see that long and short shape. Now click in between keyframe 2 and 3 and choose Copy Start to End. And we can play this through and see what it looks like. Our subject matter, our landscape beach image, isn't too interesting. So what I want to do is kind of adjust what that looks like. Let's change the ending position for our layer number 2 to 135%. And let's pan up so that we kind of see the Diamond Head Mountain in the background, like so. And we'll go ahead and move our keyframe 1 up a little bit as well. And let's preview that and see what that looks like. There we go. I think that works a little bit better. Okay. So now we're ready to add our foreground image. We've got our background all set up. We've got our letterbox background coming into view, and now we want the bride floating on top in the foreground. So we're going to use this image, Chroma Bride. So select the image, hold on your Control key, and add it to slide number 1. Now we're going to double click, open up our slide options, and we're going to go over into the Layers category. And we'll start out here in the Layer Settings tab. Select your Chroma Bride, take her over to the left side of the slide, and we can zoom in just a little bit, about like so. Now go over to your Editing tab, and now we want to use Chroma key to remove all of the green from the background. So let's enable this option and hit Set. We'll choose our eyedropper tool and hover it anywhere over the green in the background and choose Set Color. In the preview window, it looks like we have a little bit of the green removed, which is good. Don't see much in the after editing though, so let's adjust our hue threshold. Let's increase that. There we go. Started to see some change in the after editing at about 15% or so. Let's see what happens if we move it up to 30. Okay, 34, you see it starts to eat into our bride. Let's move it back down. Let's try 18. Let's see what happens when we use the hue drop-off, the edge of our hue threshold. Doesn't seem to do much. Let's try intensity threshold. Ah, there we go. That didn't take much at all. 2% intensity threshold, and it took most of the background away. Let's see what happens with 3. Even more. 4 is excellent. You'll notice in your after editing you've still got a nice green hue around the edges, so let's try intensity drop-off and see if that helps any. Maybe we can increase the intensity threshold to 5 or 6. Increase that intensity drop-off. Seems to be helping a bit, but we start to eat into our bride here at about 50%, so let's move it back down to about 20. Again, it's just more of a kind of looking at what's going on in your picture. I don't have magical settings, just kind of testing these out. And see what happens with color suppression. Again, be careful with color suppression. If I take it too far to the right, my bride turns red. And get that kind of unnatural look. We definitely don't want that. See if we can increase any of these a bit more. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. We've got most of the green separated. So now we can click OK if you want to see exactly what that looks like. So now we've got our bride floating along the background. Now we just want to add a little bit of motion to our bride. And let's go to the effects category. And we don't need to do any special keyframing really. All we're going to do is in the ending position, keyframe 2. I'm just going to use my mouse wheel to zoom in a little bit to where she takes up most of the left side of the screen. So just zoom in. So she's kind of casually zooming in like the background is. And let's click play to watch this all the way through. There we go. Awesome. So, first example, we have a chroma bride floating on top of a letterbox shape. So again, this is by no means the end-all be-all of what you can do with chroma key transparency or with alpha masks, but it's a good example of how you can start to combine different elements together. So take a look at some of the images that you use in your slideshow. Maybe something has a predominantly one color in the background. Maybe in this picture you want to try and remove some of the blue sky, or maybe in this picture with the leaf on the white snow you want to try and remove the snow so that you've just got a leaf floating around. Think about how you can use chroma key in your slideshows. The second example that we're going to create is called magnifying glass, and this is actually a slide style that is included in the program. And we've left this as part of the advanced masking class because I think it is good to know how that slide style was created, and it's also good to know how you can, when you know how it's created, you can start to adjust it. So instead of creating the exact same example we're creating, you could go in and have the magnifying glass layer move in a different motion path and still create a very similar example. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to have two of the exact same image in this example. And the second version of the image is going to be zoomed in a bit closer than the other. And we're going to have a mask, an alpha mask, sweep across the slide. And so that anywhere where that mask is, we're going to see the zoomed in version of the image. And that's going to give us that magnifying glass look. So to create this example, we're going to use this image, Rustic 02. So we're going to drag and drop it into slide number 2, and we'll go ahead and drag and drop it one more time. So we've got two layers of the exact same image. Let's go ahead and leave our slide time at 5 seconds. Let's double click to open up our slide options, and let's start out in the layers category in the layer settings tab. Alright, so for layer 1, which there is a typo in your notes, it says the top image of the peacock. That is not what this image is. It's actually a stagecoach. We're going to change our top layer to 160%. And we're going to offset it slightly. So we're going to set it to 10, which is slightly to the right, by 5, which is slightly down. So when you think about it, when you use a magnifying glass, it slightly offsets what you're magnifying. So that's kind of why we're doing that. And I'm going to take layer number 2, and I'm going to zoom in or adjust the scaling just a bit to fill frame so that it takes up the entire image. Alright, so now we've got our two versions of the exact same image. Now what we want to do is create our mask that is going to mask over layer number 1. Because this is the layer that has an increased zoom value. And so anywhere where our mask is going to show up, that is where we will see this zoomed in layer, this magnified layer. So I'm going to click on the plus button. Make sure you have layer number 1 selected. Click on the plus button, choose to add a masking layer. Once again, we're going to choose a solid color layer. We're going to change our solid color to red. Now before we continue on, I want to adjust the resolution of my solid color layer. Instead of this nice triangle that matches the aspect ratio of my preview window, I want to do a perfect square. So I'm going to change the resolution to 600 by 600. And then I'm going to click OK. Now, take a look on the left side. Make sure you change your mask type to alpha transparency. And you can see right now it does create that zoomed in effect, but a square isn't very reminiscent of a magnifying glass. We need to adjust the shape of our alpha mask. So let's go over to our editing tab. Make sure your alpha mask, layer number 1, is selected, and go over to the left underneath editing tools and choose vignette. And this time, instead of a rounded rectangle, let's use an ellipse, which now we have that more round shape. And we want to eliminate that kind of fuzzy edge that is very typical of vignettes. So we're going to take the vignette size down to 0. So basically we're using the vignette option as a tool to change the shape of our solid color. Make it a circle rather than a square. We aren't using it for the fuzzy edge at all. So we'll say OK. Now if I click OK, you can see we have more of that magnifying glass look to it. Okay, so now let's add some motion, because it's not much of an effect if it's not moving. So let's double click on our slide options and go over to our effects category. We're going to leave both of our rustic _02 images still. We don't want them to move at all. Only thing we want to move is layer number 1. Now what we want to create is kind of a smiley face shape. A kind of a half circle, semicircle. So we're going to start with our mask completely off the slide, and we're going to start moving it in a down direction until we get down towards the bottom of the slide. And then we're going to change directions and move up towards the upper left-hand corner of the slide. So because we need to change directions right here, that means we're going to need another keyframe. So we've got 1, 2, 3 keyframes. So we need to add another keyframe. Let's click the plus button to add our new keyframe. Now we can add that motion. So I'm going to take my keyframe 1 for my solid color layer and drag it up off the top right-hand side of the screen. In the ending position, which is keyframe 2, I'm going to take my layer and drag it down pretty much right towards the middle of the slide. Now click in between keyframe 2 and 3, and for the keyframe 3 position, we're going to take our layer completely off the screen in the upper left-hand corner. And you'll see that the smoothing has created kind of a semicircular look to my motion path lines. And when we're done, just click OK. And let's preview what this looks like. So that looks nice as is. We've got our circle coming in from the upper right-hand corner. We're seeing exactly what our image looks like. It continues off the slide. All I want to do is kind of polish off this effect. I want to add a little bit of separation between our magnifying glass and the background. So what I'm going to do is add an additional layer. Let me go into my layers category here. We can work here in the editing tab, that'll be fine. Make sure you have your solid color layer selected. I'm going to right click on it and choose Duplicate Layer. Now my new solid color layer is going to be located as layer number 1 now. I'm going to use my down arrow, and it's automatically going to move it past the next layer, since these two, layer 1 and 2, are linked together. So my new layer is now layer number 3. Now all of the changes that I applied to my original mask layer have been applied to layer number 3 as well. You can see in the After Editing pane, it's a circle. The vignette has been applied. In our effects category, it has the same motion path. So we just want to make a few changes so that it acts as kind of a drop shadow rather than this bright red mask. So I need to change the color of this solid color layer because it's not going to be a masking layer. So I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to choose Edit Layer and go to Solid Color Options. And now just change your color to white and say OK. Now, as an extra step, I'm going to go on the left side here and choose to enable a drop shadow. Now let me click OK, and let's take a look at what our layer looks like. You can see the vaguest, faintest hint of a white outline around my layer. And as it starts to pan across the screen, we get a nice drop shadow, kind of helping to separate this layer from the layer beneath it. Alright, so that's our finish. This is a very simple example. It took us about a little over 5 minutes to create. So it's very easy for you to recreate. And so think about when you're using this, when you're using these concepts to create your own examples, what else could you do besides a magnifying glass? The basic concept is, for this slide, that we're taking two images that are exactly the same. We're making changes to one of the layers. So our two layers were exactly the same. We made a change to one of them, and we used a mask to reveal, kind of subtly, the changes between the two layers. It's the same image that we're looking at, but the mask is letting us preview the edited layer. So maybe you could do something like you could have two images, and instead of zooming in on the top layer, maybe you change the brightness. Or maybe you take the second layer and you make it really dark. And then you use your mask to reveal the lighter layer. So it's essentially creating a spotlight effect. And you don't have to make your magnifying glass layer this large. You can always zoom out on it a little bit. And you could give it a different motion path. So take these examples and use them as a starting place to start creating your own examples. So I went through these first two examples fairly quickly. Before we move on to the third example, which was a bit more complex, I just want to kind of gauge how you guys are doing. If you're feeling pretty good about everything we've done so far, go ahead and click on the hand icon to raise your hand. Let me know that you're still with me. Okay. It looks like I've got about 70% of you, so most of you are doing well, so I think that's good. I feel good about going ahead and moving on to the third example, which is the film strip. Now this is a really neat example, and what we're going to do is we're going to use an image of a film strip, and it's located here in your slide list, which is a little difficult to see, but it'll become more clear once we start working with it. But we're going to use that to hold a series of masked images. So the images are going to show up inside the film strip, and we're going to use a mask to make sure that the shape of the images fits inside the mask. So we're going to combine this with motion and keyframing. So we're going to control the precise timing of when these images appear, and so it's going to combine for a really neat effect. So first we're going to create the background for our slide. Then we're going to add the film strip. And then we're going to set up the masks for our images and set up the timing of when those images are going to appear inside the film strip. And as a final effect, we're going to add a little glow, kind of a vignetted glow behind the film strip to kind of further highlight what we're doing. So this example goes through quite a few steps. You'll notice it's the last 4 pages of your notes. So that's why I wanted to make sure we had almost 30 minutes to create this effect, because it does take quite a bit of time to set up. Once we've set it up, though, I think you'll really like the finished output. And once you get going, it doesn't take quite as long if you want to recreate this. It's mostly just the first time making sure you get the concept right. So let's set up our background. We're going to use this image Abstract 02. So let's drag and drop that into slide number 3. Now I'm going to adjust my slide time. We're going to make our slide time 10 seconds. And we'll go ahead and add a 3-second transition out at the end. Let's double click on our slide options. As always, we're going to start in our Layers category in the Layer Settings tab. Since we are working in this 16:9 aspect ratio, I do want to change the scaling of my image. So I'm going to make it fill the frame rather than fit to the frame. And we're going to have this layer move just a little bit. Let's go to our Effects category. We don't want it necessarily sitting still the entire time, so I'm going to leave my starting position as is. But in the ending position, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit, maybe 110%, and add just the slightest bit of positive rotation. So you can see the difference between keyframe 1 and keyframe 2 is minimal. And since it's taking place over 13 seconds, it's not going to be too dramatic. But it's going to keep things moving in the background. Alright, so background was easy. We've got that all set up. Now let's add our film strip. So look for film strip PSD. Now this is a PSD file. It has uses transparency. So select your layer, hold down the Control key, and drag it onto slide number 3. Now it's a little bit easier to see what your film strip looks like. Now we're going to be wanting to use this in a vertical way. So let me go in real quick, go to our Layers category here in the Editing tab, and rotate our layer 90 degrees. Now let's go over to our layer settings and do some adjustments. First thing, on the left side, change the scaling to fill frame. We're going to change our position. We want to drag this all the way off the slide, so 0 by -170, which, since we've changed it to the scaling to fill frame, that doesn't take it quite off the slide because our layer is really large, which is fine because we want to not be able to see this film strip layer at all. So to achieve that, I'm just going to change my zoom value to 150%. Now we can't see our film strip. We can see kind of a faint black line up here. That's about it. Alright, so just to check and make sure everything's a-okay, look in your Editing tab, make sure that in the After Editing pane, your film strip is vertical. Okay, now let's set up the motion, how we want this film strip to enter the screen. Let's go to our Effects category. Here's what we want to happen. I'm going to do my best to illustrate it for you. We're going to have our layer start out large and off the screen. We want it to head down and get smaller until it gets to a certain point. Then we want it to kind of bounce and move up just a little bit. And then we want it to stay still throughout the end of the slide. So it looks like we're changing directions 3 times. And when we add our ending point and our starting point, that means we have 1 to 2, our layer goes from large to small and moves down. 2 to 3, our layer moves up a bit, and then we want it to stay still from this 3 point all the way to 4. So we need to have 4 keyframes. All right. So we can do that really easy. I can right-click here in my keyframe timeline, choose Insert Multiple, and type in 2. That's going to, adding 2 more is going to give us a total of 4 keyframes. Now we need to change where we want these keyframes to be. I don't want my film strip to appear at the very beginning of the slide. I want to have a little bit of time where all I see is the abstract background. It doesn't even have to be that long. All we're going to do is we're going to right-click on keyframe 1, choose Set Time, and we're going to set it to 0.6 seconds. So not even quite 1 whole second, just half a second of just the background, and then our film strip will appear. Keyframe 2, so remember from 1 to 2 our film strip starts out large and gets smaller. We're going to set keyframe 2 to 3 seconds. So it's about 2.5 seconds for our film strip to enter the screen. Now from keyframe 2 to 3, that's where our film strip is going to inch up just a little bit further. And we don't want this to take very long. We're just going to set keyframe 3 to 5 seconds. We're going to leave keyframe 4 at the end of our timeline. So let's go back to the beginning. Make sure you have keyframe 1 and 2 selected. In the keyframe 2 position, we've already set up everything for keyframe 1. That's where we set up the 0 by -170. We set the zoom X value to 150. For the keyframe 2 position, we're going to move our film strip to the right side of the slide and set it to 15. And we want it to be right smack dab in the middle, or excuse me, towards the bottom. So we're going to set it to 50. We want to make it smaller, so let's change the zoom value to 35. So because our zoom value is 35%, now we can actually see more than one kind of window of our film strip. So 50 is down towards the bottom of the slide. So now, in between keyframe 2 and 3, we want to move our film strip up a bit. If you want, you can do just a quick copy start to end, just to make the settings match in between keyframes 2 and 3. Because we don't want the size to change anymore, we don't want the X, the horizontal position of our layer, to change anymore. So for the Y position, go ahead and change it to 0 in keyframe 3. So that's going to bring the middle of our image back up to the middle of the slide. Now click in between keyframe 3 and 4, and now we want our layer to stay absolutely still. So choose Copy, Start to End. Now let's play through and see what this looks like. Now, something that I want you to see is what happens right here in between keyframe 2 and 3. Notice how it's kind of a rounded action? That is because we have that 50% smoothing on all of our keyframes. So what I want to do is remove all of the smoothing here in my all of my keyframes. When I do this, take a look, especially when I do keyframe 2, take a look at the starting position and ending position. Take a look at the motion path in between keyframe 2 and 3. When I take that smoothing down to 0, that line straightens up real quick. And then from keyframe 1 to 2, go ahead and remove the smoothing on keyframe 1. Now let's play through and see what that looks like. Now we get that hard bounce that we were looking for. Alright, so now our film strip is in place. So from this point on, when our film strip comes into place, which, keyframe 3 is at 5 seconds. So at the 5-second mark of our slide, that's where our film strip starts moving. And now, in these windows of our film strip is where we're going to have images start to appear. And again, we're going to use masks, we're going to use alpha masks to allow our images to fit sort of behind this film strip, even though our images aren't going to be in the shape of a film strip. They're not going to be portrait-oriented images. We're going to use horizontal images. We're going to use landscape-oriented images. But the alpha mask is going to allow us to sort of change the shape and make it fit into the film strip. Okay, so let's double click on our slide, open up our slide options. Let's start out in the layers category in the layer settings tab. Here's what we want to do. Go ahead and click the plus button and choose to add a solid color. We're not going to add a masking layer yet, since our layer that we're going to be masking hasn't been added to the slide list. We're just going to add this as a plain old solid color. Your notes tell you to add it as a black layer. I am going to add it as a red layer. This is going to let me easily identify that this is an alpha mask. So I'm going to add my red layer and click OK. And we want to make sure that it's in between the background and the film strip. So I'm going to use my up arrow to make the film strip the top layer. And if you want, this is where you could start to rename your layers so that they make sense. So instead of using Abstract02 as my layer name, I could call this background. And that might make a little bit more sense. I could spell it right. And we can, instead of calling this solid 1, we could call it mask layer or something like that. So renaming your layers could help as well. Now we want to change the size of this layer so that it fits into the little windows of the film strip. So I'm going to go over to my effects category, and we're going to use the fact that we can break these constraints. We can skew our layer. So in your notes, if you're following along, make note on step 15 that the coordinates are incorrect. So I'm going to break my constraints. For zoom X, I'm going to change my X value to 24 in keyframe 1. And for zoom Y, instead of the 47 that's recommended, I'm going to do 64. Alright? Now, we've got the size right, but we need to place it in the ending position, because in the starting position, our film strip hasn't come to rest yet. But we can see the film strip in the ending position. So I'm going to do a quick copy, start to end. And here in the ending position, I'm going to take my layer and I'm going to place it right there in the middle of my film strip. Right in that window in the center of my film strip. And once you have it placed correctly and are happy with the placement, I'm going to do just a little bit of adjusting. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of a feature that is in version 4.1. If you are working with version 4 or earlier, you're going to have to follow the steps that are located in your notes. Step number 17. In the starting position, you're going to have to kind of manually copy over the settings that are in your ending position. If you're using version 4.1 or later, you can simply choose Copy and say Copy End to Start. So there's a reason for upgrading. Pretty cool feature. Alright, so now we're done with this layer. Now what we want to do is go ahead and click OK. And we're going to start to add in the image that we want to appear. So for this image, ProShow recommends that you use this image landscape desert _01 as your center image. And I think that looks nice. We can use that. So I'm going to select this layer, hold down my control key, and add it to slide number 3. Now I'm going to double click, open up my slide options, And it doesn't matter which tab you're in, since your layers list is located in every tab of your slide options. I'm going to take my new landscape desert image. I'm going to use my down arrow to move it right underneath that solid color layer. Now I do need to go over to my layers tab, select my solid color layer, layer number 2. On the left side, enable it as a masking layer. And we're going to change it to alpha transparency. Alright, so if we look, we can see that it's only showing, our desert image is only showing up where that alpha mask is. So it looks like it's situated right in the window of that film strip. So let's do some arranging here. Let's go over to our effects category. And in the starting position, make sure your landscape desert image is selected, layer number 3. Let's make our image smaller and make it to where we see an interesting part of the image in the preview window. Maybe like so. And now just do a quick copy, start to end. And in the ending position, we don't want too much motion going on, but we can give a little bit of motion. How about a negative 3 degrees rotation? Subtle, but it's still moving. Okay, now here's the problem. If we scrub through, we can see this image layer even before our film strip is in place. So we need to change when this layer appears. We need to move where keyframe 1 is located. So, we don't want this image to appear because remember, at the 5-second mark, that's when our film strip stops moving. So let's move keyframe 1 for layer number 3 to 5 seconds. There we go. And let's go ahead and do the same thing with our mask. Go ahead and right-click, choose Set Time, and set it for 5 seconds. Now, here's what's going to happen now, though. When we scrub through, we get to this 5-second mark, and bam, our image shows up. So it would look nicer if we were to add a layer transition. So let's go ahead and add a layer transition for our mask layer. I'm going to click on the cut flag underneath keyframe 1, and I'm just going to choose a regular crossfade blend for my transition in. By default, my transition in, it looks like it's going to be 2 seconds long, so I'm going to right click at that end point and choose Set Transition Time. Let's make it shorter. Let's make it 1 second. And if you want, you could choose any sort of transition that you want. I use just a plain old crossfade blend, but you could use any sort of transition. If you'd rather have something a little more flashy, you could certainly do that. Alright, so let's see what our effect looks like so far. There we had a nice blend in for that particular layer. So now what we're going to do is we're going to repeat these steps 2 more times to fill up the top window and the bottom window of our film strip. And there's many ways that we could do this. We could go all the way back to step 14 and start over again. But I think it's a little bit easier if we take advantage of the layers that we've already created and use some duplicating options. So what I'm going to do is select layer number 2, which is my solid color mask layer. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to choose duplicate. My new layer shows up as layer number 1 now. Use your down arrows so that this new layer is underneath the masked pair that we just used. So you should only have to use the down arrow twice. You want your new layer to be just above the background. Now, take layer number 4 and move it in your starting position so that it takes up the bottom window of your film strip. And then do copy, start to end. That's the new position for this layer. Now, we want to stagger the appearance of these layers. So I'm going to take keyframe 1, and I don't want this layer, this mask, or this soon-to-be mask, to appear until the previous set is finished appearing. So I'm going to right-click on keyframe 1, choose Set Time, and add 1 second. We'll have it come in at 6 seconds. Let's click OK. Let's add our new layer. Maybe this image. This desert image. So I'm going to select that new layer, hold down my Control key, and drag and drop it into slide number 3. Let's double click, open up our slide options. Let's do a little bit of rearranging. Our new layer is now layer number 1. We want it to be underneath the solid color layer that we just selected. So it should be film strip, red layer, then an image, red layer, and then an image. Now, here's a little trick for you. Here in your layers list, I can click on my solid color layer. I can right-click on it, and I can say Use as a masking layer. Now, by default, I believe it will make it an alpha mask, but we may need to check and make sure. So, just to check and make sure, I'll only do this once. Oh, yep, it did. In my layer settings, check and make sure it's an alpha transparency layer. It is. So it's good. So now, go to your effects category, take your new landscape desert image. Remember, layer number 4, our mask, comes in at 6 seconds. So let's have layer number 5 come in at 6 seconds as well. Now we need to adjust the positioning of this layer. Let's make it smaller. Let's see if we can put something, make it small enough to have something interesting in that little lower window. We don't have a lot of space to work with. I think that looks pretty good. We can take a look at that plant that's on the screen. So choose, copy, start to end, and in the ending position, go ahead and just add a little -3-degree rotation, just so it's moving. Alright, everybody with me so far? We're going to repeat the exact same steps. The first mask was the hard part. Now it's the easy part. I'm going to select one of my solid color layers. It doesn't matter which one. We'll go ahead and just do layer number 4, since that's the last one we did. I'm going to right click on it and choose Duplicate Layer. We need to rearrange our order so that this new solid color layer is located beneath our film strip. Take that new solid color layer and use our down arrow on it just right above the background. I'm going to go ahead and change when this layer appears. So I'm going to right click on the starting keyframe and I'm going to add 1 second. I'll set it to 7 seconds instead of 6. And now I'm going to take this layer, my solid color layer, and drag it up. About like so. And then do copy, start to end. Now I'll click OK and I'll choose another image. Let's work with the dunes. I think that looks good. Take this image, drag it into slide 3. Now of course we've got to rearrange our layers again. Make sure your new layer is down below the newest solid color layer. Now we can just select that solid color layer, right click on it, and say Use as a masking layer. Now we need to adjust layer number 7. Remember, layer 6, the layer that's masking layer 7, comes in at 7 seconds. So we want the exact same for layer 7. Change keyframe 1 to 7 seconds. Now let's do some adjusting as far as what we see here in the starting position. think that looks pretty nice. We'll go ahead and copy start to end. And in the ending position, just give it a little bit of negative rotation. Just a little bit, 3%, 3 degrees. Now let's click OK. Let's see what we've done so far. And everything's moving, but it's a very subtle movement. Now, I told you at the beginning when we were talking about what we were going to do with this slide, the last thing that I want to do is add a glow. And it's just going to give a little emphasis to our film strip. And giving this kind of glow is really easy, and feel free to take this glow and use it in all of your slideshows whenever you want to enhance something. It's very easy to create. So I'm going to open up my slide options real quick. Let me go over into my layers category. And I'm just going to click on my background image. And maybe it'll add it in the right place. We'll see. I'm going to go ahead and click the plus button and choose to add a solid color. We want to make this solid color yellow. It is going to be our glow after all. But I am going to change my opacity. Instead of 100%, I'm going to make it 80%. So it's slightly transparent. And say OK. Alright, so it looks like it put our new solid color in the correct place for us, which is great. We want our new yellow layer to be placed right above the background layer. So it should be layer number 8. Alright. Now let's go over to our editing tab. We're going to use the ever popular vignette option again. I'm going to enable a vignette for layer number 8 and click on the vignette button. We're going to leave the type as transparent, but change the shape to ellipse. We're going to change the vignette size to 100%. That's going to give us that nice glow look. And say OK. Alright, so now let's set up where this comes in. So let's go over to our effects category. Go ahead and add a new keyframe for your vignette. Make sure your vignette's selected. We're going to set keyframe 1 to 6 seconds. So we want the film strip to have entered. We want the first image to have appeared. We're going to set keyframe 2 to 7.5 seconds and leave keyframe 3 at the end of the timeline. In the keyframe 1 position, we're going to have our layer start out at 0. And actually, let me do a real quick Control-Z to undo what I just did. Before I make it 0, let me place my layer right behind our film strip, the center of our film strip. Now I'm going to make it 0. And I'm going to do a real quick copy, start to end, for keyframe 2. Now in the keyframe 2 position, though, I'm going to zoom in to 150%. So there we have the nice bright glow. Click in between keyframe 2 and 3 to copy our positioning, especially our pan value. I'm going to do another copy, start to end. But then in the ending position, keyframe 3, I'm just going to change my zoom value to 75 so that it kind of starts to fade a bit. Now let's look at our finished effect. So I think that glow really helps to finish out the slide. And I think without the glow, it gets a little boring having the images just sit there. And yeah, they're moving that -3 degrees, but with the glow, there's still a significant amount of movement on the screen, but you're still able to examine exactly what has shown up in the film strip. So it keeps your audience's attention and still lets you focus on the images. So, we did have a lot of elements to this slide. We had 9 different layers, but none of our layers had terribly complex keyframes. Most had 2, maybe 3. I think the film strip had 4, but the most was 4 keyframes. So you can create really neat effects when you start combining keyframes, and it doesn't have to be tons. But just being able to precisely control when your layers appear is really nice. And add to that the effective use of alpha masks allows you to basically change the shape of any image to fit what you want it to be. Alright, so I've gone over a little bit in time, I apologize, but I want to open up the floor to you guys to any questions that you may have. So if you've got some questions, feel free to type them into the question box, and I will answer them in the order that I receive them. All right, Alexandra, what is the difference between chroma key transparency and PSD file transparency? Will both images behave in a similar fashion? Absolutely. They're both working with transparency. So if you have a transparent portion of a PSD file like we did for this film strip, it's going to work exactly the same way as the transparency that is created when you use chroma key. Alright, basically it just makes a transparent area. So the difference, there is none. The PSD file was created in Photoshop. When you can do chroma key in Photoshop, I'm pretty sure. But the difference is basically that you're using chroma key transparency within the program. But they behave exactly the same way. So no matter what sort of transparency you have in an object, it's going to work the same way inside Photoshop. Good question. Anybody else? I'll go ahead and play through all three examples if you want. Okay, and I got a question from Alexandra. She said, how will a difference in resolution for masks, for example, for vignettes 100 by 100, 300 by 300, 600 by 600 look? Is there any difference at all? I don't think there will be. So when you were talking about, say, that second example when we made it 600 by 600, the good thing about making it 600 by 600 is it still took up most of the screen. I don't particularly know what will happen if we make it smaller, but we can check it out. I can insert a blank slide and we can take a look. So if we were to go in and choose, say, to add a solid color, and we'll make it kind of that bright yellow solid color so it shows up, and we make it 100 by 100, and then click OK. It's still going to take up the whole screen. And since it's a solid color, I don't think it's going to pixelate. Let's see, ellipse, make it 0. Oh, it does pixelate. Oh gosh. Yes, it does pixelate. So you do want to take into account that it will pixelate. That is interesting to know. That was a very good question. So you see how it kind of pixelated around the edges? That's why you want to make it, that's why you want to go in Edit Layer and choose Solid Color Options and make it 600 by 600. So now it looks much better. Alright. Alexander asked, can a mask have a drop shadow? What we did in example number 2, the coach. If it cannot, then was it a reason for duplication of the red mask? Yes. A mask does not have a drop shadow. So that is why we added the additional layer, so that we could have that drop shadow. So no, a mask cannot have a drop shadow. Because what you're seeing on the screen is not the actual mask. The mask performs a function. So when we see these images appear, we're not seeing the mask. We're seeing the actual images. But the mask is what allows them to appear. So no, you can't have a drop shadow on a mask. And that is why we duplicated that red layer and had the white floating underneath it. And David, I see that your hand is raised. If you have a question, feel free to type your question into the question box. If you don't see the question box, oh, never mind, you see it. Just wanted to thank you for a good lesson. Quite a few ahas. Perfect. Wonderful. And Alexandra said, got it. Thanks. Good. Thank you for being here as well, David. Alexander said, can we see large images somewhere to set keyframes without knowing exact coordinates? So when you say, can we see large images somewhere, what exactly are you referring to? Because really the only time you need you don't need exact coordinates for really much of anything in example 2 or example 3. I did have exact coordinates, which is why we used them, but the same basic idea would work. We wanted the image to start out large. We wanted the film strip to start large and then come into place. And yeah, I would, yes, just by dragging. That's what I would do, is just set it up by dragging. And with the actual images, with the masks, I did do that by eye, like by hand. I just drag and drop them into certain places. I didn't use any coordinates for those. The only thing I did use coordinates for was the size of our mask. And you could very easily determine that yourself without knowing the coordinates, without knowing that it needs to be, what was it, like 24 by 67 or something to that effect. Yeah, 24 by 64. And the reason why I knew that it wasn't 24 by 47 was because when I used those coordinates and drag and drop them into the film strip, it didn't quite fit. So I just kind of manually made it a little bit larger until it did precisely fit into that center window. So, you know, all of this stuff you can figure out yourself. It might just take a little bit longer. And since this was such a complex example, knowing the coordinates, you know, helps it go a little bit faster. To see it, layer motion, last icon on the left. Layer motion. Oh, I'm not quite sure what you're referring to there, Alexandra. Sorry. Layer. Fifth icon on left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh. Your preview motion keyframing? Magnifying glass? Yeah, and that helps you to, oh, I see what you're saying. It helps you to see it a little bit better. Yeah. Yeah, that would definitely help. And it makes it a little bit larger. And this is your precision preview, for those of you who may not be familiar with it. And it basically allows you to zoom in on your layers. And you could definitely use this as a way to kind of help you precisely size your film strip, or the mask that goes in the film strip. Yes, I see what you're saying. Sorry about that. I got a little confused. And yes, is the zoom on top. Yeah, zoom is up here in the upper left-hand corner. You can change your pan coordinates, your zoom coordinates. You can link or unlink them. One thing you need to be aware of is that you can only work in one keyframe at a time, so you don't have a starting and ending position. So you need to make sure you're working in the correct keyframe when you're making any of these adjustments. Okay, magnify, yes. It's hard to type it in short. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? If you guys are curious about any other classes or anything else having to do with masking or anything else we covered today, I'm happy to answer that. Just want to let you guys know we released quite a few new classes, another good 2 weeks or so of classes. So if you're looking to take a class and didn't see the one that you are interested in, take a look on the Photodex website. We've released some new classes, or at least newly scheduled classes. So we've gone through the middle of March, or excuse me, through the middle of February, and more classes will be coming soon. So take a look at all we've got to offer. Of course, you guys are already in the advanced classes, so you may not need many more. Alexandra asked, how does more than one image go under one mask? That is, if you wanted more than one image to appear, say, underneath this solid color layer at the top, you would add in another image, and then you would just link that image to the mask. So you could use these right and left arrows, or you could go into your layers category, make sure that solid color is chosen, and change the mask depth. Instead of having it be 1, you could change it to 2. That means in order for both of those layers to show up, that mask has to be shown there. So, I don't think it's necessary in these particular examples, but it would basically mean that, it's masking both of those layers. What will it do? How will it look? What is it good for? I don't use it too much, but it could be good for any number of things. I'll show you an example here. Let me grab two of these mountain images, and drag them into slide 4. So if we were to take this solid color layer and make it a mask, and just make it an alpha transparency mask, and we could take this landscape mountains image 1 that isn't linked right now, and just take it over to the right. I just use that right arrow button. Now you can see that our mask, you can see through this little tree going underneath the mask icon that both of these images are masks. Well, while Landscape Mountains 1 is on top of Landscape Mountains, while layer number 2 is on top of layer number 3, it's not going to make much of a difference at all. We're only going to be able to see layer number 2. But if maybe in our effects category, we take layer number 2, and towards the end of the slide, we have it move off of the slide, well, then we can see layer number 3. So it would look something like this. Layer number 2 is disappearing. Layer number 3 appears behind it. And because it's being masked by layer number 1, we can only see the shape of the mask. Yeah, you could transition between images if you wanted. If you wanted to, say, have copy start to end, we'll make that stay still. If you wanted to, say, have layer number 2 transition out, layer number 3 would be behind it. So maybe something like that. Certainly. So you could certainly do that. And yeah, so that could be one use for it. So can we have 2 masks for the same image? No. You would have to add the same image in again as another mask. So I wouldn't be able to go in here and add another mask on top of this one. I'm not quite sure why you would want to do that. Only one mask per image. Only one mask per layer. How about that? Not per image, per layer. So you could have the same image twice in the same slide. So you could have, like we did here in slide number 2, where we have the same image in there twice. We have 2 layers. We could only have one mask per layer. But we could have another mask for the layer behind it. if you wanted. But I don't know why you'd want to in this particular example, because you want to be able to see the non-masked layer all the time. So, yeah, but I get why you're asking. But yeah, you can only have one mask per layer. That would get a bit confusing deciding which mask you wanted to be working at what time. Irregular shape of masks? Sure. You can have masks that are any sort of shape. Remember, there are two different types of masks. There's an alpha mask, there's an alpha mask, there's an alpha mask, and a grayscale mask. The alpha mask works with pixels. The grayscale mask works with black and white values. And included in the program, in your media sources section, in the producer built-in content, you even have some kind of irregularly shaped masks. Got a fleur-de-lis. Got kind of an interesting shape here. You got a heart shape, a glow shape, stripes. So, yep. And Alexander said they've been created by outside software. Yes, they have. These are all PNG files. So, you could create your own masks if you want. Put a solid shape on top of a transparent background. Save it as a PSD file or a PNG file, and then you've got an alpha mask. How are frames created? Are you talking about like these borders? These were created using a photo editing software, and you started out with a transparent background. You added a solid black layer, and then added a white layer, a white square on top of it, and then cut out the center of both so that the transparent background shows through. Are they PNG? Yes, it looks like these are PNG files. But you could do a PSD file, it works just the same. It can be saved as any type of image file that will read transparency. So like JPEGs, they don't read transparency. But PSD files, PNG files do. Any other questions? David, go right ahead. Really enjoyed complex example 3. Let's do these in other lessons. This is my 4th. Cool, yeah. Some of them do, some of the other classes do go through these kind of complex examples. It's mostly the advanced classes that do that. So, this advanced masking class, the advanced modifiers class that's happening later on this week, we'll have that. Let me look and see if there are any other advanced classes coming up, because those are going to be the ones that you want. Yeah, I would go for the advanced modifiers. The intro to adjustment layers is a really neat class too, happening tomorrow morning. So definitely check those out. Alexander said, and this can be saved as slide styles. Absolutely, any slide can be saved as a slide style. Delmar said, since we don't have any new transitions, is it possible to use any of the advanced techniques to make our own? Probably. That could be a good idea for maybe a class. As far as I know, nobody's really done that, but you can use these advanced techniques to do kind of anything that you want. I have never used them to create my own transition, so I don't necessarily have a good place for you to start for that. Sorry. Uh, Alexandra, can you create a new transition? No. The transitions in the program are set. There are about 200-ish of them, but there's not really a way to remove those right now or add to them. But Delmar, if you do end up creating your own sort of transitions, let us know. I know you're in the beta group, so let them know if you've created your own sort of effect. That's pretty cool. Or you could start selling them as slide styles, even. Delmar said there are others that have done it. Cool. Alexander said, just picking. Question for your PDF class material, example 1, pages 2 and 3, point 7, top of page 3. Okay. Keyframe timeline at 10 seconds, where extra 2 seconds came from. I have no idea. Not quite sure. Point 2 on page 2, 5 seconds slide time, and transition time is 3 seconds. 5 plus 3 equals 8. Yeah, that is, you're completely right. That does not make sense. Sorry about that. The notes are somewhat of a guideline and a good place to start anyway. So definitely be wary when taking a look at some of those. We definitely have planned to go through these and kind of rip them to shreds and start over again. So, got you, sorry. No worries. That's good. We need to know when things are wrong like that. So, Delmar said page peels. Yeah. I think I've seen some people do that sort of thing, and usually it's sort of a video effect. Not necessarily a transition per se. It's more of a slide effect. But yeah, cool. All right, well, it's about that time. You guys have been a great class. Hope you have learned quite a bit and learned some new techniques as far as masking goes. Delmar said, so you think if we had a video that had transparency to use as a mask? Yes, if you had a video that had transparency, I think that would work as a mask. I'm not quite sure exactly how they've done it because I haven't actually dissected the videos myself. From what I understand, they use a video. Not sure quite how hard or how it worked. So, yeah. Thank you. And Alexandra said, video hard on computer. Oh, a video as a mask is hard on the computer. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely, when you start using some of these more advanced features, it starts to get really hard on your system resources. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Something else to keep in mind, an email has been sent to you with a link to a survey about today's class. Let us know what you thought of today's class, any comments, suggestions, feedback, any sort of requests for future class topics, let us know. We're always looking to expand our classes. Thanks so much for coming. You guys have a fantastic evening, and we will see you next time.